So let's move to the 15th question on the SharePoint quick questions and answers video series. Can you explain WSS model? If you remember the first video of SharePoint where we discussed that WSS is nothing but it's your core API on which SharePoint is built. Now, if you are a developer, then definitely this is the most important thing you should know. You should know how WSS model can be browsed, how WSS model can be used, and if you understand WSS model, then you can easily understand how SharePoint is architected, right? So what we'll do is that in this video is very important for developers, and I will really stress you guys that please I will stress out the point that please do look at this video more carefully and try to understand WSS model from the architecture perspective. Now, before we talk about the architecture, before we talk about how what are the different collections in WSS and what type of objects are existing, what we'll do is that we'll keep WSS aside and we'll just think about SharePoint. Till now, whatever videos we have discussed, we have used two things of SharePoint, two other products of Microsoft. I'll say one is the IIS and the other is SQL Server. So what we can say is that SharePoint has services, and we can classify these services. I'll say SharePoint uses services, and the two types of services. One is a non-data services, and other is a. Now, before we discuss about WSS model, or before we discuss about the WSS API, what kind of object collection it has, what we'll do is that in order to get a better clarity, we'll just think about SharePoint product as a whole, and we'll see that what kind of services does SharePoint have, or what kind of services does it use. Now, if you look at the previous videos, you can easily figure out that SharePoint uses two great products of Microsoft. One is the IIS, and the other is SQL Server. So basically, it uses IIS to uh, host SharePoint code, and it uses SQL Server to store content. It has a content database which is used basically to store customized and personalized information, right? So you can say that SharePoint has services. It uses certain kind of services, and you can classify these services as non-data services, like the source code, which is hosted in IIS, and the other is database related services, that is SQL Server. Now, taking this model, we'll move ahead. Now, when we think about SharePoint, it is not only about services. One of the very big advantages of SharePoint is that the architecture of SharePoint is designed in such a way that it is basically a farm level architecture. Okay, so we had till now discussed about services. We have talked about the two services which basically is used by SharePoint. But when we talk about the overall architecture or the overall visualization of how SharePoint works, it's basically at a farm level. So we need to now give a third view to the services what are installed, and how do they actually correlate in terms of servers and farms. So we had discussed about IIS and said that yes, SharePoint needs two kinds of services. One is the IIS, one is the database services. In order to get the farm level thinking, what we say is that these services are basically installed on servers, and these servers belongs to farms. So with this, we have now got a visualization of a farm level view of how SharePoint looks at the complete infrastructure and the architecture. But the visualization what we had now, what I have explained now is that is more of a farm. It has servers, and servers has services, right? But SharePoint makes a bit of tweak here. It says farm, servers, and every server has database instances or database services. And on the other and the other side of collection, it says that farms has services and services has IIS service. So basically, a bit of tweak SharePoint gives when it starts thinking in terms of farms. It's not the normal way what we were talking previously. It talks in terms of farms, then it talks in terms of two categories. One is the server level, and then the services level. On the server level, it attaches the services, the database services with the server, and on the services level it attaches IIS. So here's how the whole picture of SharePoint WSS model comes, or it looks like. So we have the farm object, the SP farm object at the top end. It's the parent from where you can browse through the number of servers available in the farm. Every server can have database instances, and every database instances can have SP content database objects. In the same way, the other point which we talked about, the services, or the other way which we talked about, the services collection. So basically you can have services can have web application, and application can have sites. Now basically even the site is further divided, but because it was not accommodating on this figure, what I have done is that the extension from SP site I have taken up in the next slide. So we can say that site can further have a top level site, and it can have subsites, and every subsite can have list, and every list can have fields. So if we can revise how SharePoint WSS model is, first it has a two-way bifurcation, one on the farm level servers, where further when if you try to browse through the collection objects, you will get the database service instances, SP database service instance, then you can get SP content database, and that's the end of the server way. The other bifurcation which WSS model gives from the SP farm object is of service, web application, site, and it moves ahead further, subsites, list, and fields. So here's a simple code snippet by which which basically browses the basic objects. So what I'm doing is SP farm is basically a static object, so you don't need to create the object of it. So I've said, okay, SP farm, give me the farm object. From the farm object, I'm browsing the services object. From the services object, I can browse my web application, that's my IIS. And from the IIS applications, that is the web application, I can browse my sites. So this is how you can browse to the whole WSS API. Now, as a developer, it's very essential to understand this API, because this API not only gives you the way SharePoint is architected, but it also gives you the overall view of how the WSS model looks like. And if suppose in a project you are said that, okay, go to this application and add a site, then definitely you need to understand these core APIs very well. So as a developer, it's very important to understand this complete WSS model. The only thing what you need to remember from the fundamental aspect is this figure, at least the second half of the figure, that is this one. So if you can remember this one, then anytime you think, okay, you want to go to a server, go to a content database, then you can just loop through the farm, loop through the servers, go to the service, go to the database instance, etc. So the only thing which you should remember, the way the WSS model structured is farm, server, service. The other end of it is services, and then IIS services, right? So that's all about WSS, and I hope that you have understood what basically WSS model is. And in the further coming section, what we'll do is that sometimes probably in the 30th or the 40th question, we are going to take up a small sample where we will demonstrate the power, the strength of WSS, because one of the biggest strength of WSS which you can visualize at this moment is it can drill down to any level and get down to any object, and that's very essential when you want to actually program or have a complete control over the SharePoint project.